welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so thrilled that we are welcoming back Andi Ewington onto the podcast, this time to talk about the hero interviews.
Hello. Pleasure to be back.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Before we start discussing this very fun book, what's something great that happened recently?
Ooh, blimey. Now you've asked me the really toughest question ever.
That is the hardest question that you will probably get on this podcast.
You know, I think just finishing the book and getting it out and probably having some nice reviews, that's probably the nicest thing that's happened. In day-to-day life, probably, you know, still getting to the end of January and having money in the bank account. I think that's the happiest thing because Christmas is always a time of spending. And in previous years, I've always spent and got to that point where I'm looking at it going, that's just fumes now. There is nothing left in that account. So, yeah, I was happy that there was a couple of quid left in the account when payday came along.
That is good.
Yes, indeed.
Exactly.
I don't think I can top that. Sarah?
My good thing is that I got 12 hours of sleep last night.
That is good.
Which was very nice. It doesn't happen nearly as often as I would like it to.
That is a good one. What I'd give for 12 hours of sleep, actually. Yeah. Probably what was left in my account on the end of January, I would give.
Mine is just a very routine, brought the cats in for their annual vet checkup, and everything's nice. Everything's good, no problems. There's happy little fat cats. They're not too fat. They're just a little fat.
A little pudgy.
In the D&D world, we'll just call that heavily encumbered.
There we go, yes. One of my cats is definitely a barbarian. We've decided that's his class.
Okay.
But we are not going to talk about pets in D&D this time.
No, not this time.
Okay, I keep getting ahead of myself. I'm excited to talk about this book. But our next question is actually what everyone is drinking on this fine winter's day. I have some tea. I was going to drink Fireball because that would be thematically appropriate. There's none left in the house for some reason. Who knows where it went? So I have some cinnamon tea instead to still be a little bit on theme.
Brilliant. I haven't actually got it here, but after this podcast, I'm going to go get myself some biscuit tea because I am into Yorkshire biscuit tea. So it's biscuit dunked flavoured tea, which I absolutely love.
Interesting.
Yes.
What does it taste? I mean, I guess biscuits is what it tastes like.
It tastes like somebody's literally dunked. It's so great. And I've really switched from my what would be usual tea to this biscuit flavoured tea because it's the taste of the biscuit tea without the sludge at the bottom. And to me, that is just heaven.
Am I too American to have heard of that? Is that a common thing? And I'm just showing my foreignness.
It's a new thing. I've only discovered it literally this year.
All right.
I went to, funny enough, it was Rhiannon Pratchett's birthday on the 30th of December, and I was invited round to a party and just sort of catch up with her. And one of her friends from Yorkshire introduced me to biscuit tea. And I was just like, literally my eyes was like that Hugh Jackman meme where he's just looking upwards like in awe of this new thing that had been sort of pressed past my taste buds. So yeah, that's it. I hadn't heard of it before, so don't feel bad.
All right. I'm going to have to hunt some down now, see what shipping costs are like. We'll find out. Sarah, how about you?
I am drinking a combination of homemade ginger beer and homemade lemonade.
Oh, that sounds good.
It sounds amazing.
Yes, it's very refreshing. It's a little too cold out for this, but...
I was going to say, that sounds like a summer drink.
It is a summer drink. I mean, it's not like cold here, because this is California. We don't really get cold, but it's a little chilly, and this is also a chilly drink. But I have a lot of ginger beer that I made, so I wanted to use it up. So that's what I'm drinking.
Delightful.
Very good. I love it.
I will start by confessing that I have not read anything except for the book we're about to discuss in depth. But has anybody else read anything lately?
I feel terrible saying no.
Yeah.
and only because the book absorbed my life for nearly 2 years, or just over 2 years. And I get to a point where I cannot touch a book, do anything, and I just step away from writing at all, unless it's in the day job. And so I just sort of go do other things like play computer games or, remember that there's kids that I have and say hello to them and play Monopoly. So, yes, I'm really sorry. And that, I know that will get me a red card somewhere along the line, but I've not read anything for a while.
I actually have done a little bit of reading.
You overachiever.
Yes, I know. I read The Magic of Terry Pratchett by Mark Burroughs, which is the unofficial biography of Terry Pratchett. We read the official biography for the podcast. So I wanted to go out and see how it compared. And I think Burroughs has a Twitter thread about how he was really hoping that they would work well together. And I think he's right. I think they do. So that was interesting.
Cool.
Nice.
That's it. That's all I got for you. All right. Much more importantly, we have just read a series of interviews conducted of some very excellent heroes. Now, Andi, one of the recurring comments in this book is about arcane copyright magic and how the Heroes Guild sort of controls some phrases and things.
Yep.
Did you just have a premonition about all of the Wizards of the Coast copyright drama?
That was just bizarre when that came out, and it was just like, oh my god, what's just happened? I've just like cast a scrying spell or something and just seen into the future as to what's going to happen. Yeah, it actually came about because I was a little bit nervous about writing this book and sailing so close to the wind, so to speak, on some of the Dungeons and Dragons terms. And I was really careful just to make sure, what is definitely off limits. And there are certain characters and things. A lot of it is quite generalized, like clerics and paladins and fighters. So I just thought even just the experience of me going through and researching what I can and can't say, even looking up the word fireball, can I say that? And it just got to that point where I thought, actually, there's a joke in this. And the joke is that they've probably trademarked all the way across a fantasy environment where you can't actually use or say certain things without saying the words TM. Otherwise, a fair use ogre turns up and gives you a bad case of fist to headitis. So, yes, that was spooky. And somebody on my Twitter feed actually mentioned that as a very bizarre coincidence. So, yes, my heart did skip a few beats when I saw what was unfolding.
That whole thing has just been a wild ride.
Yeah. I definitely was thinking about that when I was reading the book. I was like, wow, this is very prescient.
Yeah.
I think, what I did when all of that was kicking off, I actually just ducked and just kept very, very quiet, didn't mention it at all. And I kind of was like, I don't actually know what happened. So I have not researched it. All I know was there was a big sort of kickoff about something. And I just was like, you know what? This is something I do not want to read about or get anywhere near. So I'm just going to close my web browser or, scroll up to see some cats running around falling over or whatever, because that's a little bit safer than looking at whatever this is. So do you want to enlighten me? What happened?
Oh, they were going to change their use policy. I'm pretty sure they were going to change it so that it would only affect companies that make over like several $100,000 in revenue.
Yep.
So it wouldn't actually affect a lot of the like small individual creators. But people got really mad.
As they do.
And I think at this point they have actually backed down and are not changing anything.
Yeah, I think they made an announcement like yesterday saying that they're not going to change anything.
Yeah.
First they were like, okay, what about maybe this other version? Maybe we'll change it this way. And people were like, no.
Yeah. Power to the people. That's what I say. That's what I like to see. Mob rule.
It's fascinating. Apparently, Paizo, the Pathfinder company, sold like 8 months worth of sales in 2 weeks.
They're sitting there going, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
Give us another really bad policy.
Yeah. So that's the very broad strokes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure as of this recording, though, Wizards of the Coast has said, sorry. Never mind. Although I don't want to blame them. I think it was Hasbro that was, anyway. Who knows how companies work? Not me.
Yeah, no. Somebody well paid is making the decisions and got it wrong.
Yeah. Oh, well, you have an extensive history of writing for comic books and video games, as well as this wonderful book. And we were kind of wondering what you would say some of the differences are between that sort of writing and writing a novel.
Obviously, with comic book writing, you're writing a lot of description and a lot of prose that never sees the light of day. The only thing that really sort of appears in a comic book that you can honestly say, they are my words, is usually dialogue and onomatopoeia. And that's about it. And maybe a little bit of, maybe meanwhile or something. But, a lot of the work for a comic is under the hood, and where, it differs from writer to writer. Some will just not give too many instructions to the artist, whereas I love to actually design the page. I was a graphic designer, so I know how to sort of lay out and do a reading flow and structure scenes that I kind of want. And they are generally a guide. So obviously, when it comes to a comparison, a novel, I've got to do everything. There's no pretty artwork usually to sort of help me paper over the cracks of my writing. You can do a lovely scene of I don't know, Thor smashing a hammer down on, one of the other superheroes or whatever, supervillains, and that looks amazing. And, the artist has done all the heavy lifting, whereas obviously on a novel, I've got to sort of do that visualization with my words. So there's a lot more heavy lifting in a novel. The computer game stuff it's a little bit stranger because the way that it worked, because I've sort of switched from being a narrative to actually a game director now. So I'm actually, rather than writing stories, I'm sort of coming up with the game idea. What's the game? And, building a team around it. And then that vision is then taken forward. So for the narrative, we would work by writing a script, and then that script would be refined and reworked. And it felt like a huge movie script. I mean, it would be like 400 pages, because we would have to think about everything in terms of all the different sort of permutations. And, it's not just a movie, it's an interactive game. So we would have to put little points in where there's a lot of interactivity for the player, and the design team can really get into the nitty gritty and put something together there. So in terms of writing and structure, it's more of a film script. If I look at a computer game script, it should, for me, depending on the type of game, sort of feel like a film movie script. And again, that doesn't quite sit with a novel because, again, the pretty graphics and the artwork and the animation comes in and does a lot of the heavy lifting. And usually what's left is the dialogue, which is a little bit ironic that this is a novel that is almost completely dialogue. And so you could say that I've sort of tapped into a little bit of that and thought, well, actually, I'm really good at writing dialogue. So I've written a novel that is primarily dialogue. I think writing a novel actually is quite scary for me because, that would have to strip back on the dialogue and put a lot more exposition in and a lot more sort of descriptive work. And I'm like, I just want to write conversations, really.
Well, I think you just answered our next question, which was, can you talk about why you chose this interview format for this book? But if it's because you wanted to write conversations, well, there you go.
Well, the inspiration for all of this actually came from Max Brooks and his book, World War Z. So I read that many, many years ago, and that became the inspiration for a book, my first graphic novel called 45. And 45 was a transcript interview with superheroes, which did pretty well, sort of helped establish who I was and got me sort of into the comic scene. And so I kind of liked the back and forth of a Q&A, purely because, Q&A, you're not always getting the truth. You're just getting a version of the truth, and you have to sort of read between the lines as to whether that's actually correct or not. And, whereas a lot of the novels, you're being told something and this is the truth. This is what's happening. Whereas with a Q&A, you can tap into that character a little bit more and go, well, actually, they could be completely lying all the way through. You don't know until something else happens later on. So dialogue has a way of, you can use it to misdirect a lot more. And I just really like the format of, the story. It's almost like going to those old campfire things where you're sitting down and everyone's talking about something and the story is being told to you by somebody just talking, as opposed to being there and being told that, Aragorn and the hobbits walked across the mountains for 6 days or whatever by an unseen narrator. I kind of like to get it out there in dialogue.
And I think it works really well for the story. That's not a format that I don't think that I've read any other book that is exclusively interview format. So that was a lot of fun just from that aspect of seeing something new.
I think it's a very, what we call marmite. I don't know if you've got marmite over there, but marmite is this black, sticky, tar-like substance, which some people absolutely love and some people hate. Just for the record, I love marmite. And you just spread it on toast, and it's a real strong taste. It does taste like tar, but I love it. So I think it's a bit of a Marmite thing. I think people will either gravitate towards it or they will just go, whoa, this is just too much. This is just really weird and not really get into it. But like I say, on World War Z, I absolutely really enjoyed, and I think it even stems back from, I used to read a lot of books about Vietnam, the Vietnam War and everything. And I would as a kid, I would pour through all of that, just reading all transcripts, interviews, all of their sort of harrowing experiences. And that filled my imagination and really fueled my passion for history. And I love history. So I felt that, again, World War Z, all these sort of first person account sort of interviews and transcripts was a really nice way to get to the truth and get to find out cool things. And I've always wanted to write comedy, and I've always wanted to write fantasy. And I thought this would be a nice sort of trifecta of comedy, fantasy, and first-person interviews.
It certainly is that. Also, I don't have a question here necessarily, but we did average out the amount of footnotes per page, and it comes down to about 1.8 footnotes per page.
That's not too bad. I thought it would be worse. So there are a lot of footnotes. I'm really sorry. It's funny because I've had some really good reviews, and I've had a couple of people who gave me a 1-star review on Amazon who said, it's terrible and I hate it. And, I hate the footnotes and he's not funny. And I just thought that was the funniest thing I'd read. And I've actually made that my Twitter banner now. So whoever gave me that really crappy review now I have to thank them, because I'm just using that as a bit of PR, because that is just like the funniest thing ever. So yeah, I think, like I say, it's a bit Marmite. If you're into, like Discworld and Terry Pratchett, and you like your footnotes, this is going to be a book for you. If you don't like footnotes, don't buy this book or read it and don't look at the footnotes, because it will just, you'll just go a little bit Herbert Lom, and you'll probably twitch your eye a little bit and go, this is just too much. So yes.
Although, and you certainly can read it without the footnotes, but I feel like you lose a little bit of character when you do that. So
I agree. And you know what? The weird thing about the footnotes is I wrote the book without the footnotes to begin with.
Really?
Yeah. So I literally wrote the whole book, drafted it all up, and it was all done. And then I don't know why, either somebody mentioned something to me, or I suddenly had that eureka moment. It was like, oh, because I was reading, I think it was something from Small Planets, Tales from Small Planets, or Letters from Small Planets by Nate Crowley. I forget the name of the book now, somewhere around here. But it's got a lot of footnotes. And in fact, there's a whole conversation between the editor and the author, the fictitious author of that book. I think it's called Notes from Small Planets. And it's all in footnote form. So I was reading it, just chuckling away, going, this is really funny. He's having a big argument with his editor in the footnotes while you're reading the book. And then I suddenly thought, you know what? I could just take Elbin's experiences of everything that he's interviewed and just get him to sort of almost put comedy moments, little thoughts, and it gives you another insight into the character, because it actually deepens Elbin's character and makes you think about what he's thinking, and it gives you some history about his life, his uncle Bevan Barr and things like that. There's like lots of little hooks and stuff weaving all the way through the footnotes that you will miss if you don't actually look at those footnotes.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun, references to other interviews in those that I really enjoyed going, oh, wait, I just read that. I got that. I understood that one.
Exactly. And that's done on purpose. It's done on purpose so that you go hunting. I want readers to hunt and go, hang on a sec, that was mentioned over here and that was here. And, and then you start, cross-referencing and you go, right, hold on a sec, I've got to read this again, this whole book again, because there's stuff I've missed here. And there's a lot of stuff. How I've managed to tie everything up, I don't know. Maybe you'll tell me that I have or haven't or missed something. I don't know.
I think my favorite footnote was the one about Gorgons, though. And I won't say anything more. I'll just let the listeners go and find it themselves.
I do like the Gorgon reference, because that comes out in the interview as well. So,
Mm-hmm. No, I love that one. It was delightful. We get to see many different classes, from traditional fantasy tabletop role-playing games in general. And I was wondering if there is a class that you've never gotten the chance to play as, but you would really like to.
Gosh, now you're asking. I've played wizards. You see, I played a lot of MERP rather than Dungeons and Dragons. So I would be playing animists, which is your cleric. I've played rangers to death. Man of rangers I've played, because the rangers are, and I even referenced this, that they're the jack of all trades and master of none. And so, you know what? I don't think I've played a thief. And I really want to play a thief, but I've never played a thief-like character. I've always gone for the paladin, or, you know, the barbarian, or the wizard, or the animist, or I've never played a monk either. So maybe a monk, just purely because, you know, punching things and furious blows and things like that, just, you know, are just things that have not really been part of my repertoire as a player character, you know. So yeah, I think a monk, definitely a monk. And I'd be a really bad monk as well. You know, a bit like Po out of Kung Fu Panda. I would just be sort of like, I'd have to be sort of like just always eating or something, and then inadvertently hitting and killing people while I'm trying to make something with a wok, or you know, whatever. You know, that type of thing. You got to have some sort of quirk, I think. Otherwise, you just end up playing a stereotypical character. I think Dungeons and Dragons and stuff is more fun when you got a character and you go, right, okay, how can I really fuck this character up? Oops, didn't mean to swear.
Aha! I knew we'd get it out of you.
Damn, sorry.
I think that's one of the really fun things about role-playing games, is that you have the opportunity to be so many different characters, and they're all so varied and different, and gives you a lot of chances to do wacky stuff.
I think that's the key. I think going into it and going, okay, I'm going to play a barbarian that, you know, gets angry and hits things. You go, oh, everybody does that. Oh, I'm going to play a barbarian that's a pacifist and never gets angry, or is trying to contain his rage. That's the challenge, and I think that's where the fun starts to come out, when everyone's going, right, we need you to get angry. No, I don't get angry. You know, no, we really need you to get angry. So I think that's where the comedy can come out, and I think that's kind of how I approached a lot of the writing and a lot of the interviews. It's like, okay, what can I do, and how can I twist this so that it's the most absurd it can be?
Well, and we see that immediately with Dorn the Barbarian. I mean, right from the very start, he's not your stereotypical barbarian. No,
exactly. And I think that, weirdly, it was actually my editor, Paul, that suggested that I switched Dawn around with Morgan. I started with Morgan as the first interview, but he suggested switching the other way around, just to go with Dawn, because he felt that set the tone of the entire book. And he was right, because I think Morgan is the stereotypical forgetful wizard type of character. There's a little bit eccentric, and they are like all over. They're always sort of around. Every sort of wizard character generally is a little bit nuts. So Dawn's character off the bat was a good sort of shout. And I like the fact that he references the traditional barbarians, you know, the pictures of the scantily clad guys on the wall wearing fur loincloths, or what he hopes is fur loincloths, upon closer inspection. And fur loincloths get mentioned a lot. And, you know, there's always those sort of continuing gags that are there just to sort of remind you that this isn't going to be your normal D&D fantasy type yarn.
Speaking of gags, you make a couple of jokes about how it's silly to have a paladin and a cleric in the same adventuring party. Does that come from personal experience, or?
I just think it's just logic. I just look at it and go, why are these two in the same group together? You know, one is allowed to use the sword. I mean, it's changed now. Back in the day, you know, when I was playing, clerics weren't allowed swords. So it was like, well, what's the difference, really? You know, just one's a little bit more repressed than the other, and the other one's going around probably with a collection box. So I just feel that the two of them are doing the same job. One's a little bit more tanky, and one's probably a little bit more spelly and, you know, focused. I know a cleric is really a paladin that it doesn't hit as much, and a paladin is a cleric that hits a lot. So that's kind of how I see it. But I don't think it's any real personal experience. It's just that whenever somebody said, you know, somebody's a paladin, nobody ever went, right, okay, we're going to put a cleric in the group as well. We always looked at it and go, what are you going to have, a cleric or a paladin? Which one do you want? You're not going to have both. So I think that's where that gag comes from.
We also get some really wonderful recurring jokes about fireball mishaps, which I think is extra funny just because anyone who's played one of these games has experienced a fireball mistake. I was wondering if everyone could share a fireball story.
I don't think I actually have any fireball stories.
You don't play D&D, though. You play one of those other weird ones.
I mean, I play Pathfinder, and Pathfinder has fireball.
It does? Well, you better play a wizard and make some fireball mistakes then.
I don't like playing spellcasters because it's like so much more work than just playing a character that hits things.
It's been a while since I've played D&D. Having kids, I used to play a lot of MERP. That used to be my game, really, more than D&D, Middle-earth role-playing. So I think, I'm not sure there was mishaps, because MERP has a great critical failure table. So whenever you have cast a spell or anything, you have to roll on and make sure that the spell's successful. And if you don't, you've got a critical table. And it literally is a table from 0 to 100 and then from 100 to 120. And you really don't want to be in the 120 brackets because those are catastrophic sort of failures. And they work on a system from an A critical down to an E critical, I think. And E criticals being, you add 20 to your roll, which is if you roll 100, you'll end up 120, which is why you've got that extra little system. And so the critical system is brilliant because you would literally, if you fumbled as a wizard and cast a spell and you totally cocked it up, and then the DM or the GM, because it's MERP, would say, right, okay, you got to roll and it's an E critical and you rolled as, 0-0. You then have to go track it all the way through. So it's like a fire spell and you would then read the critical at the bottom and it would say something like, okay, well, it's an E critical. So it's a plus 20 to your roll. You've rolled 100, it's 120. And 120, you are dead. Okay, it doesn't matter what it is. It will just, automatically, because every single 120 is death. And it will just have a little description. It will just say something like, I don't know, throw the fireball at your opponent and by some miraculous quirk of fate, it rebounds off of their armor, hits you and incinerates you into a pile of ash. And then it says try a spatula because that's all that will be left to pick the remains of you up. And the critical system was just brilliant. I can't remember anything in terms of any quirk, any fireball spell that went wrong. I just remember that we used that critical system to death. And there were some hilarious moments where literally we were sort of impaling ourselves and then you have to role play on with, you go, right, okay, well, you've got an arrow stuck in your eye. What are you going to do? Whereas D&D, you just go, you just take 6 hits and that's it. MERP, you've got to carry on with whatever that little description has left you in. But they had criticals for everything from, using a spear to mounted lances and everything. So if you cocked up anywhere, you would have to then go on that little table and read it. So yeah, fireballs were definitely on there. And I'm pretty sure you would have been a pile of ash at some point or somebody within the group has been.
Oh gosh, not quite a pile of ash in my experience, but in my longtime campaign, our dwarven fighter got his hands on an amulet of fireball, and the very first time he used it was in a very small room. Not only did we all get very, very hurt, our DM decided that the fireball destroyed all of the loot. Don't use fireball in the treasure room. What were you thinking?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think it's great as a DM. You can just literally punish your players for silly mistakes and go, right, okay, no, I'm going to make this really bad for you now. And you're going to sit there and remember the day that you melted the treasure.
Yep.
There you go.
And I remember it to this day. Fireball mistakes. That was years ago. When things go wrong, it's so much fun.
So because of the nature of this book being in an interview format, it's very episodic. When you imagine people reading it, do you think that they are reading it like an episode at a time, taking it slow, or do you imagine them just reading all in one chunk?
No, I think slow and steady for me. I think people will go, okay, I'm going to read 3 interviews today. And I think by the 3rd one, they're going to be going, okay, I need to sort of stop, digest what's been said, try again tomorrow. I'm sure there are people that are consuming it. I've seen some of because on the Kindle app, it allows me to have a look at the account. And it's on Kindle Unlimited. So it tells you, how many people or how many pages have been read, which is a little bit Big Brotherish. But you can see, like today, 3 pages have been read. And then tomorrow, 2,000 pages have been read. And you go, wow. So you start to try and work out how that's actually transpired. Have 2,000 people read it, 1 page, and gone, this isn't for me, and put it down? Or has 3 people really sort of gone, right, we're going to hit this and going for it and really consumed the whole lot in one sitting? I'm happy if people are reading it. I'm happy. So that's kind of how they read it. I really don't mind. I think personally I would read it in little chunks and then sort of digest and then crack on. But I'm sure there's people that will read it all the way through and then start going back, maybe following some of the threads and going, I'm going to go back to that interview and read that interview and really sort of like jump around a little bit, because trying to edit that as well was quite tricky, because I would write something in and go, oh, didn't I mention this in this interview? So I'd have to go back and read that section of that interview. And then I go, oh, crumbs. No, I've done this. So I'd have to go and change that. And then I'd suddenly go, well, hang on a sec, but I said this in this one. So I'd have to then jump forward to one of the other interviews. And you start finding that it becomes a bit of a ball of string. And you're going, oh, or a can of worms, or rather, as the analogy. And you start to pluck that out, and then something else sprouts up, and you're going, oh, God, no. Hopefully, that hasn't happened and people can say, yeah, okay, everything makes sense. But I think reading, whatever takes their fancy. I'll throw the question back. How did you read it?
Well, I feel like that's not necessarily a good judge, because since we're reading on a schedule for an interview and we record pretty much weekly, there's only a week to read. So you can't take it too slow, because it's 927 pages in Kindle.
It's a big book.
It's a little chunky, which is delightful. I mean, there's lots to enjoy there, but yeah, so we had to read it fast. We couldn't digest.
I'm really sorry. I don't know why I did so many pages. I tell you what, the part of it was that I wanted it to be a spiritual successor to 45. So for that to happen, I needed 45 interviews. You've got 45 interviews. So in that way, it's a little nod of the hat. And also, I don't know if you saw, but 45 is a bit of a special word for me, or a special number. Because it was my first novel, 45 gets mentioned quite a lot in everything in those interviews. And if you go there's 45,000 heroes, people reference that number quite a lot. And it's basically my little tongue-in-cheek nod to 45, the book. And I hide the number 45 in a lot of the comic work that I do. So there'll be one of the books, there's a kid wearing a T-shirt with the number 45 on it. And somewhere else on Freeway Fighter, there's a road and there's a big number 45 painted on the road as if it's like an I number or something. So yeah, there's lots of little Easter eggs.
So how much do you plan when you write? You've mentioned, going back to double check continuity. Does that mean that you were sort of just discovering as you went, or did you sort of have it scoped out?
There was no planning. This was literally seat of my pants. I went from one interview to the other interview, and it was probably about halfway through that I thought I might know a way to tie all this up. And so I think the essence of the story was in my head, what I wanted to do and how I wanted to develop. I had no idea how I was going to get there. And to be honest, a lot of my writing is like that. I much prefer to sort of not plan. I say not plan. Sometimes I've planned, but I enjoy the challenge of going, I'm just going to write and see where this goes. I feel that way it's a little bit more wandering, a little bit unexpected, and a little bit more sort of, you don't know what you're going to get, because you're sort of discovering these things just at the same time as Elben, the Law Master. So I just think, I always think about the next interview and go, right, who do we need to interview next? What's a really cool character next that can we interview? You start with Barbarian and we go to a wizard, but quite quickly we get to, an NPC, because I thought, well, it would be quite nice, because I don't want to just simply go through the standard fighter, clerics, and they are in there, those type of characters. But I wanted to introduce some more sort of peripheral characters or strange characters that you wouldn't even think of. You got a dungeon master that we interview in there as well. I kind of wanted to break it up a little bit, and that's how it sort of forged the story and the structure. And I think by about chapter 7, which I think is Thord, the blacksmith, I kind of had the idea of where this was going to go. So the first ones are a little bit more exploratory, and then I think I start finding the plot starts to find its feet moving forward at that point. And I did retrospectively go back in and start going, okay, I know that the ending, there is a certain thing that needs to be prevalent, and, that needs to be earlier in the book. And so there's things seeded around that I sort of had to go back and replant just to make sure that that has some continuity when we get to the end. And hopefully you found the end satisfactory, because I had another version of the ending, and one of my other editors, Erica Marks, she ripped into me for the ending and didn't like the ending. And I was like, oh, okay, I really liked it. And she was like, no, because you'd built it up, and I just felt it wasn't quite right. And I went, right, okay. And I took that on the chin, and I just went, right, okay, I'm going to rewrite that end. And I totally rewrote it. And hats off to her. She was completely right. And I feel that the ending now is the ending that we needed, as opposed to the ending that I originally sort of envisaged. So yeah, none of it was really planned. Felt my way along, rather than going, yes, this is the vision, this is what it's going to be.
Well, I did really enjoy the ending. When we get to the spoiler section, I do want to ask you about the original ending that you had,
Yeah, of course.
had planned, but saving that for a little while longer. You've talked on Twitter about recording the first 2 interviews and bringing them to life in an audio format.
Yep.
And we were very lucky to get a preview of that. It's fantastic. But what was the process like?
You know what? It was quite enjoyable. The whole idea was that I would throw out, and somebody came back to me. I think it was Alistair Stewart. He came back and said that I can do a voiceover and I can probably put you in touch with a few people. And he did. He put me in touch with Guy Adams, Sarah Griffin, and David Devereaux, the editor and director. And we all just chatted around. And it took a little while just to sort of coordinate everything and pin down costs. And then I just had to reformat the script into an audio script. I mean, it's very close to being an audio script because it's dialogue. So I just needed to write it in with a few notes and directional notes and things like that. And then we just sat down one Saturday and literally just went through it and just, recorded it pretty much like this. And it was such a laugh. And then David took all of the pieces of the audio and then pretty much hammered out a fantastic edited version with all the sound effects and everything. And hats off to David. He did a fantastic job on it. And yeah, it's there as a test piece. I want to kind of find out what can we do with it. There's no plans to release it as yet. I'm kind of hoping that somebody will come along and go, because it goes over. I've got a manager in Hollywood.
You know a guy.
He lives in LA and he helped out on a couple of TV deals and things like that. So, it's gone to him to see if he can find a home for it. And if we can find somebody to pick it up and give it the love that it needs and take the audio team with us, that would be fantastic. I think it would be really, really cool. I mean, you've listened to it, so I'm hopeful that you'll feedback and say, this has potential. It's very sort of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is where I was pitching it really, in that sort of narrated book type of way when you got the footnotes. So I'm hopeful that somewhere along the line it will see the light of day. I'm just sorry it can't be right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works really well as an audio format. Partially just because it is a series of interviews, and the 2 that you sent over were, as I said, fantastic. I really enjoyed listening to them. So I hope that you can at some point do the other 43.
Yes. It doesn't cost me to do it. I think that's the key thing. I had to pay for these 2. So I kind of got to the point, it was like, yeah, I can't do that anymore. The bank balance really didn't like that. But no, the team did a fantastic job and I'm really delighted with the end results. I just hope at some point I'll be able to share that, even if it's just those 2. I think people will get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we have a couple of burning questions, but before we get to the spoiler section where we can ask them freely, Sarah, who should read this book?
You should read this book if you like humorous fantasy and if you enjoy playing fantasy RPGs.
And if you like footnotes.
Yes.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 53:15.
Okay, now I can ask because I'm dying to know. So you talked about the original ending and how you changed it.
Yep.
What was your original ending?
The original ending was just, there was no thrust of, or no mention of Elben going after the Heroes Guild. It was just purely they were going to go off on an adventure and they'd become heroes, or he had become a hero, and they were going to ride off to the sunset and find fame and fortune. And Erica just said that I just felt that was a little bit, it just left too many questions. You've been building up to the Heroes Guild and you hadn't addressed the fact of what they were going to do with them. So I had to go back and really sort of needle the plot a little bit to make sure that it was really clear that Elben was going to go and potentially bring down the Heroes Guild. And that was the thrust of it. And so I agreed with that. And I felt that my sort of perhaps a little bit of a woolly ending of, they're going to go off to be a hero. It was the right tone, but it left you feeling like, so we did all of this stuff with the Heroes Guild just for them not to be even mentioned in a final hurrah. Whereas, Erica was right. It did need to be picked up and wrangled a little bit and really sort of pinpoint, no, they're going to do something about this. And obviously that could be picked up in book 2 if I ever get to it.
Would you say that was the biggest change that this book went through? Like, how different is the final product from the first draft?
You know what? It's not a million miles. I had a lot of help on the editing. Paul Martin was the main editor. He did a lot of tweaking and sort of pointing out just little issues or things that or additional jokes that would make sense. Erica came in and done a really good polish on it. And I've had two beta readers, Paul Devereaux, another Devereaux, no relation, and Lisa Blackwell Dickinson also gave me some good critical feedback. So it was good to basically have that. And I would say most of it was the same. It was just, none of the characters changed. Maybe some of the jokes and some of the thrusts, sometimes some of the jokes was too near the knuckle. I had some good advice because I wanted to do a sanity check. And so Erica mentioned that, the word suicide could be a bit triggering for people. And I was like, I didn't even think of that. So, I went back and tried to adjust out anything that would trigger people unnecessarily. So I was really mindful of that, especially because it's self-published. I tried my best to get this published. But it's so out there as a book. I think a lot of publishers just got a bit scared, saw it was too big. And, the only publisher that wanted to have a look at it wanted to, cut it by 2/3 down to like 100 pages. That's not even 2/3, 1/9. I didn't want to do that. And I felt that it would lose the soul of what it is. I know it's a big book. I know that, this is comparable to The Fellowship of the Ring and asking you to read The Fellowship of the Ring. But I don't think in the same way. I think the writing is a lot easier to consume and is probably quicker to consume than something hefty like The Lord of the Rings. Just because it's a big book doesn't mean it's a hard read. I think it's an easier read than many will probably give it credit for.
Yeah, I mean, it is long, but I think you're right in that it's not a difficult read. And it goes by pretty fast.
Yeah, exactly. I felt the same. And I think a lot of the read is also in the footnotes. So, you can digest them quite quickly. But like anything, how many times can you watch a funny episode of something? You could probably watch 3 or 4 episodes of The Office before you go, right, okay, I'm done now on The Office. I don't want to watch anymore until tomorrow, maybe, or something. So it could be that, again, you have to slow down a little bit, going back to your original question, because you could get joke saturation. And I'm conscious of that. I don't want people to be fatigued by the jokes. I kind of want them to have laugh out loud moments. The encouraging thing is there have been people that have tweeted to me, this is fantastic. I love this line. And I've laughed out loud about it. And to me, that's the biggest compliment. I want people to laugh out loud and tell me that they had a really good time with it. And, that's all I ever really wanted. I love comedy. I grew up with, Blackadder and The Young Ones and stuff like that, which are very sort of British orientated comedy. And I felt that the comedy that I've written is very Monty Python English. So hopefully it's translated well across the pond.
I think so. You mentioned the possibility of a sequel, and you teased that in the very last footnote with a mention of the Hero Diaries.
Yeah.
Do you intend to write that? Do you have a story in your head, or?
I don't have the story. You know me. I seat of the pants. There will be no planning whatsoever. But yeah, the concept is I want to write a year's diary as one of the characters, be it Dawn, be it Elben. Probably Elben makes more sense because he is the law master after all. But do it in the sort of the Adrian Mole sort of style. If you ever read Adrian Mole by Sue Townsend. So basically it is written as a diary. So you read Tuesday the 15th, this is what happened. And then you read the next section is Tuesday the 16th. And it may only be like 2 lines, didn't get up, had a hangover because the previous day was a massive party. So that's the kind of thing I want to do, because I think the format is what excites me. If there's an interesting format, I will go for it full out. This one, I wanted to do interviews because that format really excited me. The next one, I want to do it almost as if, I go, right, today I'm going to write a diary entry for Elben and I will write it for the whole year and then, see where we are and see if I can mold it into the continuation of the story, but in going after the hero interviews, the Hero Guild.
Since your process is so discovery focused, were there any interviews or aspects of this book that surprised you?
Yeah. I think the Mind Warrior did. I didn't know where I was going to go with that one. I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I just kept layering bizarreness upon bizarreness, because even there, a fireball gets mentioned in that. And then the joke about casting invisibility on a fireball was just like, that is awesome. Why can't we do that? Has anybody ever cast invisibility on a fireball and then cast it? So, yeah, I think that character in particular was a discovery one. Gosh, Lotho was a bit discovery. I had the idea of having a mimic in a pipe organ. And again, I wasn't sure how that was going to go. I think my funniest interview is probably Lance and Holden, because I just love the comedy guards, because there's always guards in cities and things like that, and I kind of wanted them to be the focus. And their story was just the fact of the matter. Even little things. In fact, I think Erica suggested that Elban gets the name wrong of Holden, because Holden's joke at the end is how to spell it. Remember, my name is spelt with two N's, but if you actually look at the way that he's written Holden down, he spelt it with one N. So there's little jokes like that are just visual gags that are just, it's just in the way that it's written. So it just chuckled me that was like that could be the awesome gag. He's just spelt it all the way wrong through the interview. Yeah, things like that are just unexpected. I think the jokes, when a joke really works and it comes off and you go, that was just awesome, because I wasn't expecting that. I think it's the jokes really more than the characters, because the characters are bizarre in their own sense. And a lot of the time they write themselves, but discovering a joke that just suddenly comes out of nowhere, that Lance and Holden one, him talking about wizards and the fact that Holden hates wizards. And there's a joke in there about, I think Elban even turns around and goes, "You sure it wasn't a wizard?" And he just looks at him as if to say, "I'm going to fire this crossbow at you now." And Lance tells him to put the crossbow down to stop him from shooting him. Just things like that are just little situation moments that just make me chuckle. And I just think if a little moment like that comes out, I'm buzzing like anything, because that just makes me so happy.
Would you say then that was also your favorite interview to write, or? Gosh,
I think Seymour's my favorite interview, because Seymour is a character I've written into so many books that have never been published. I wrote a comic that I wanted to get published called Post-Mortem, which was basically Death becoming a superhero. So he kills like Superman, and a bit like Death in Terry Pratchett. And whereas Death has Death of Rats as a little familiar, my Death had a talking skull called Seymour. So Seymour is a character that appears in nearly everything I write that has never been published, because I just love the idea of a talking skull. Now, that came from Planetscape Torment, from, I think it was Murray, or that may have been from Monkey Island. Anyway, there's always a talking skull in either Monkey Island, the game, or Planescape Torment. And I like talking skulls. I just think they're so funny. And so Seymour, for me, is probably the funniest, because you have a return interview that you don't expect at all, which is, as somebody said, the 1-star review said it was tedious, predictable, and badly written, which I thought was hilarious. And I thought, nobody saw that Seymour was going to be the head of the Thieves Guild, right? Nobody.
I certainly did not.
Nobody saw that. And then nobody sees the joke coming about the wooden phallic statue that he's been put on, and that is uncovered, and that there's only 2 heads. He's staring at 2 heads of the Heroes Guild rather than one. And then he's like, "Come on, give me some dignity." I'm not seeing how that could have been predictable.
Did you have to cut any interviews? Were there any that didn't make it onto the page?
That's the beauty of self-publishing, you see. I could put whatever I liked in and not have to sort of bow to a third party telling me that I could or couldn't do it. But no, there was nothing that was cut. There may have been little sections that were cut that I really wanted in, but no, nothing that was cut. Actually, to go back, you were saying about the interview. I'm going to jump back to the interview. I really liked the interview with Thunk, the librarian, purely because I think the idea of a barbarian running a library is totally absurd. And I like the fact that he threw a halfling through a wall. And he goes, "What wall?" And he just points down the corridor to this halfling-shaped hole. And he said, "That one." So, yeah, nothing got cut that didn't deserve to be cut. And it would have only been small gags here and there. Certainly no interviews. Everything went in. And I probably would have done more if I never wanted to see the book come out.
Did you have any interviews or events in this book inspired by gameplay, or did you have any fun inspiration sources?
You know what? I think a lot of the inspirations came from movies. If you probably saw, there's a lot of references to different little gags in there. I think really nothing sprang to mind from any of my personal experiences. I think the only things that really sort of lent into were tropes. So, you would go, well, it's a typical sort of barbarian going nuts, or rangers hiding in bushes. I think those are the things I lent into. And really sort of TV and movies and films. So, everything gets referenced. I mean, Aliens gets referenced a couple of times. A Few Good Men gets mentioned. There's a lot of movie. Terminator gets mentioned with the wizards hunting down the Thieves Guild. There's so many movie references because I think in terms of inspiration, I'm a very visual person. I love my movies. I love my TV shows. And so, I could sit and quote Blackadder all day. Those type of things I really sort of use as a springboard for what's written, probably more than what happened in a D&D group, because I'm 50 now. The last time I probably played D&D seriously was probably about 20 years ago. My memory is awful. I can barely remember what happened last week. I remember little snippets of things. I think the only thing I ever remember seriously was playing D&D one day of a lunch break and the DM being quite a pain in the arse. And basically we spent the entire lunch break, and bearing in mind lunch breaks at school were like gold dust, walking through a door. And he would say, right, we want to walk through the door. And so he took that literally. So he was like getting us to, you hit the door and they go, well, we'll walk through the door frame. And, he was literally just being obstinate and just making it really difficult. It took us a whole lunch break to walk through one door. And then after that, we never let him DM again. I'm sure there'll probably be times I'll sit bolt awake one night and go, oh my God, there was that time we did this. And then I'll write that down and use it in the hero diaries, but I can't remember.
All right.
Do you have a favorite joke?
I already said my Gorgon joke was my favorite. Your Gorgon joke was my favorite.
But you can tell the jokes now.
It's true. I'll have to look it up.
We're in the spoiler section.
I'm trying to think of favorite jokes. I don't know if I specifically have one, but I really like the part where it's the interview with the museum curator. And she's talking about this beautiful painting. And Elburn asks how much they paid the artist. And the curator's like, pay? Yeah. We didn't pay her. She got exposure for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those are the type of things, because I do lean into what's current. And obviously artists getting asked to do fantastic pieces of art purely for exposure, which I totally disagree with, is something that niggles me a little bit. So I thought I'd just reference that.
I thought the timing of it was perfect. It was so good. I got there and I was like, oh yes, So I really enjoyed that.
Cool. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, even like the Bowstaff and his figurine collection.
Oh, I love that.
There's a lot of references to, the whole idea of collecting stuff. And then we go and meet a fan collector. And that story ties up quite nicely because obviously Elburn finishes the collection for her. So yeah, there's lots of things in there that are fun.
I found the footnote. Footnote number 304. Contrary to legend, Gorgons don't turn their victims to stone. They actually only freeze their victim's face into a hideous grimace that often leaves those who are unfortunate enough to catch a glimpse of it with a frozen grimace of their own. Those afflicted with this curse have to wear a bag over their head for the rest of their days or risk spreading it to everyone they meet. I loved it.
Beautiful. Which is also, that joke comes back in Seymour, actually, because obviously that's where Morgan is wearing his bag over the head. And that reference gets referenced again. So, yeah, and that was purely by accident, because then sometimes I think to myself, oh, hold on a sec, I remember that I've mentioned about a bag on the head with the Gorgon. So then that's how I would bring in that gag and then go, right, I can do that there. So it is a voyage of discovery a lot of the time. You think the footnotes worked is the question.
Well, we're fans of footnotes, so maybe an easy crowd for that question.
That's all right. That's it. That's okay. I'm preaching to the choir. Yeah. So fantastic.
Well, Andy, you just finished this huge project, so I'm not going to ask you what you're working on right now, because hopefully it's enjoying the high of finishing a book.
That's exactly what I'm enjoying. I'm enjoying the peace and quiet of not writing.
So our listeners can follow the journey of this story, maybe buy the ebook or find the audio adventure if it ever exists. How can they find you on the internet?
I am always on Twitter, much to my fault. For however long it's there, I'm the Dungeon Master Ewington, or at Andi with an I, Ewington.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. It's been a delight talking to you, as delightful as it was reading this very funny book.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for inviting me on the show. It's been fabulous, and catch you for the next one.
Yes, we're looking forward to the Hero Diaries.
Hey, listener, stick around for an exclusive peek at the audio version of the Hero Interviews.
The Hero Interviews by Andi Ewington. Interview 2. My following interview is a little strange, to say the least. Through my study of tomes, scripture, legend, and folklore, I have made myself familiar with most professions, such as fighters, clerics, wizards, bards, and the like. But Yana comes from a new wave of adventurers answering the hero's call, for she is the first officially recognized mime warrior to set foot in the realm. But Elben, I hear you ask, what is a mime warrior? To answer that question, I'm standing in the shadow of the goblin-infested Halgorn Crags, waiting to find out from Yana herself. I'm on high alert as the Halgorn Crags loom ominously above me. I'm more than aware of the reputation of this dangerous place, and I don't fancy becoming target practice for any arrow-happy goblins lurking out of sight. Goblin archers are awful shots, second only to halfling archers. Halfling archers are so bad, they have been known to shoot themselves, rather than their notched arrow, at an enemy. For some reason, I find the image of a surprised dragon turning to see an even more surprised halfling hurtling towards it at high speed highly amusing. But as I round the first large stone boulder and begin the arduous hike up towards the goblin-infested crags, I spy a solitary figure sitting patiently upon a large flat rock. She's stoic, almost statuesque, as she sits in perfect silence. A handful of stones scatter behind me underfoot as I try to scramble up the incline towards the woman's position. In a flash, her head turns in my direction, revealing a shocking white face with thick black lines daubed across her eyelids and lips. Her hand goes to her hip to grasp the pommel of a sword that isn't there. Yana the mime warrior? The woman smiles warmly before standing on her rocky perch and bowing low. I'm Elben the Law Master. The mime warrior gives a thumbs up and leaps from the rock before beginning a jaunty little walk towards me. Suddenly, she stops as if blocked by an invisible barrier, forcing her to put her hands up and feel her way around a wall, and I cannot see. Finding an edge, the mime warrior begins to navigate her way around this transparent maze. I witness this bizarre spectacle unfold for a full 10 minutes, as she frustratingly hits dead end after dead end until, mercifully, she finds her way out of the unperceivable labyrinth.
Sorry about that. One of the many downsides of my profession. The unexpected maze.
I've been told that nobody expects the unexpected maze. Unexpected what?
Maze. Yeah, they're a problem for any mime warrior and can spring up when least expected. But when they do, I have no choice but to find the exit or forever be trapped inside. Have you ever tried navigating your way through an unexpected maze? Thankfully, it's just a bit of an annoyance more than anything else. And don't even get me started on the unexpected locked door.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.